After the first dawn came the builders, those who turned memory into empire. From the Nile's sacred flood to the forested hearts of the West, from the golden savannas to the thunder-soaked highlands, power did not merely rise, it radiated. It flowed like breath, guided by ancestral law, harmonized by math, and ignited by the sacred force of Ace. Africa did not awaken into history, it birthed it. And when it did, it built thrones not just to rule, but to remember. This was the age when thrones were altars, when kings sat not above their people, but among them, embodiments of balance, justice, and spiritual resonance. It was an age shaped by architects of harmony, not warlords of destruction, where temples were lined to stars, palaces to the pulse of the earth, and markets to the rhythm of moral economy. Across the continent, knowledge was not hoarded, it was honored. Power was not seized, it was bestowed through bloodlines soaked in ritual, and land was not conquered, it was consecrated. Each kingdom rose like a verse in a sacred song, some built in bronze, some in stone, some in the silent language of cosmic mathematics, but all built with intention. Africa now entered its golden age, a moment when wisdom became the most precious currency. Sacred architecture, divine kingship, and vast networks of trade and knowledge wove a tapestry that connected the continent like a living mind. Ideas flowed faster than gold. Justice was measured not by courts, but by character. And across 4 directions, civilizations rose that would one day whisper to the pyramids, the stars, and beyond. This was not an age of isolation. It was an age of integration. An age when Africa built not walls, but worlds. In the heart of West Africa, where the Niger bends like a serpent in prayer, the Empire of Mali rose, not merely as a kingdom of riches, but as a citadel of spirit and intellect. This was no accident. It was prophecy fulfilled. The story begins with Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Mali. More than a warrior, he was a weaver of destinies, binding scattered clans into a unified tapestry of justice. Born under mystical signs, Sundiata defied exile and silence to found an empire built not on conquest but on covenant. His victory at the Battle of Kirina in 1235 was more than a military triumph. It was the restoration of harmony among a people who had lost their center. He didn't just establish power, he revived memory. Under his rule and those who followed, Mali became the gravitational center of West Africa's Renaissance. Its soil bore gold, yes, but its soul bore light. No figure embodied this fusion more powerfully than Mansa Musa, the emperor who redefined the meaning of African power on the global stage. His legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 was not just a religious journey, it was a revelation. Mansa Musa did not travel quietly. He moved with tens of thousands, scholars, griots, generals, merchants, and enough gold to bend economies. But more than wealth, he carried vision. Along his routes, he built mosques, funded libraries, and connected Mali to the wider Islamic and intellectual worlds. When he returned, he poured that vision into cities like Timbuktu and Gao, turning them into magnetic poles of global scholarship. Timbuktu, to outsiders, it became a symbol of myth. But within the walls of its libraries and universities, it was truth in ink. At its heart stood Sankore University, a beacon of African intellect where the sacred and the scientific were not in conflict, but in concert. Here, manuscripts flowed like rivers, in Arabic, Ajami, and native tongues, on astronomy, law, medicine, ethics, and metaphysics. These weren't translations. They were original African contributions to the human archive, ideas etched by candlelight, knowledge preserved on sheepskin and sandalwood. Lectures were held under open skies, with students debating the nature of stars, society, and the soul. Sankore was not just a university, it was a sanctuary of thought. Mali's scholars did not separate science from spirit. They studied the stars to honor the Creator. They healed the body while purifying the heart. Knowledge was sacred, a bridge between the seen and unseen. In this empire, to write was to worship, to teach was to serve, to know was to rise. Urban planning in Mali echoed this harmony. Cities carved with the flow of the river, not against it. Markets were aligned with prayer times. Homes were built from mud and magic, earthen yet eternal. The land was used, not abused. Everything served a purpose beyond the physical. Mali was not designed for dominance. It was designed for alignment. The empire's power rested on three sacred pillars: gold, governance, and guidance. Gold funded its expansion. Governance maintained its structure through local leadership and spiritual counsel. But it was guidance. The wisdom passed from elder to child, imam to student, griot to memory, that gave Mali its soul. In Mali, knowledge was wealth, and the word was sacred. It was a realm where a poem could travel farther than an army, where a king's greatness was measured not by the fear he inspired, but by the libraries he built. And though time would pass and shadows would fall, the light Mali lit has never fully gone out. It lingers in manuscripts, in legends, and in the hearts of those who still believe that power rooted in wisdom can outlive even the longest empire. To the south, nestled in the emerald rainforests of West Africa, rose a city unlike any other, a city sculpted by spirit, ruled by rhythm, and cast in eternal bronze. This was Benin, a kingdom where the divine did not descend from heaven. It radiated from the palace. The heart of Benin was its geometry. Streets were not laid by whim, but by cosmic alignment. The city expanded in concentric design, with roads radiating from the Oba's palace like solar flares, echoing the structure of the cosmos itself. This was no accident. It was sacred mathematics rendered in clay, wood, and iron. The city pulsed with spiritual symmetry. Each gate, each courtyard, each corridor was calibrated to maintain harmony between the seen and the unseen. At the center stood the Oba. More than a monarch, he was a vessel of the divine. As priest, artist, and guardian of ancestral balance, the Oba was entrusted with the sacred stewardship of the city's soul. His court was not merely administrative, it was a temple of aesthetics and ethics. Every ritual, every decree, every procession reinforced his role as the axis mundi, the point where heaven touched the earth. But it was through bronze that Benin whispered its eternal memory. Using the lost wax technique, a sacred metallurgy passed through generations. Master artisans created plaques, statues, and reliefs that chronicled the heartbeat of the kingdom. Each casting was a prayer, each figure a preserved soul. These weren't merely decorations. They were maps of the kingdom's divine order. The Benin bronzes captured everything: royal ceremonies, battles, ancestral worship, and cosmic myths. They documented a civilization where art and state were inseparable, where metal remembered what mouths dared not forget. These bronzes adorned the palace walls, shimmering like scriptures, telling of kings, queens, warriors, gods, telling of a people who carved time into eternity. Even Benin's defense reflected its spiritual logic. The city was encircled by massive earthen walls and moats that stretched for over 16,000 kilometers, longer than the Great Wall of China. But these were not barriers of fear. They were expressions of sacred boundary. They defined the threshold between the mundane and the divine, the outside and the within. To enter Benin was to cross into a kingdom that had architected its power on purpose. In Benin, to build was to believe. To cast in bronze was to preserve the spirit, to make eternity tangible. This was not a city hidden in the forest. It was a star made of stone and soul, a capital where the ground echoed with drum beats aligned to ancestral time, and the skies nodded in approval of the balance below. The colonizers would one day invade and loot, stealing thousands of bronzes and attempting to silence the memory. The spirit of Benin still burns, not just in museums, but in the hearts of those who still see the city as it was, sacred, sovereign, and beautifully alive. Far to the south, where the earth rises into plateaus and the wind carries whispers older than language, there stands a city carved not in bronze or clay, but in stone. It has no mortar, no written blueprint, no carved inscription of its founding. And yet it speaks. This is Great Zimbabwe, the city that defied time and colonizer logic. A marvel of African engineering, a symbol of spiritual sovereignty, and a heartbeat of trade that echoed across oceans. For centuries, it was called a mystery, not because it was unknown, but because it was unacknowledged. A monument too grand, too precise, too powerful to fit the colonial script. But the stones do not lie. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries, Great Zimbabwe rose not as a fortress, but as a sanctuary of order. Constructed from granite blocks stacked with no mortar, its walls stand in seamless formation, bending and curving in perfect spirals, some reaching as high as 11 meters. These were not mere enclosures. They were inscriptions. The builders understood more than architecture. They understood vibration, harmony, energy. Each wall was an echo of cosmic principle. At the center of the complex lies the Great Enclosure, a structure whose very design mirrors the cycles of life. Its inner walls swirl like a spiral galaxy, suggesting rebirth, fertility, and continuity. These were not defensive structures, they were symbolic wombs, reminders that power comes not from domination, but from balance. Great Zimbabwe was a node in an intricate trade network that stretched from the Swahili coast to Arabia, India, and even China. Archaeologists have found glass beads, Persian ceramics, and Chinese porcelain within its ruins. But this was not exploitation. It was exchange. Gold flowed from nearby mines, traded for silks, spices, and knowledge. The city was not isolated, it was global. And yet, the center held. Despite its far-reaching trade, Great Zimbabwe retained its spiritual integrity. The stone birds perched atop its towers, now iconic symbols, weren't decorations. They were sentinels of sacred presence, representations of ancestors who watched over the city and its harmony with the earth. Its layout, like Mali and Benin before it, followed more than physical terrain. It was aligned with spiritual intention. The placement of towers, enclosures, and living spaces followed the cycle of the sun and moon. Solstice alignment suggests that the builders marked time by sky and season, not by clock or coin. To walk the stone corridors of Great Zimbabwe is to walk inside a prayer. One not written in language, but laid in layer upon layer of granite. Each block holding memory, each curve reflecting the curve of the stars. The silence of the city is not emptiness, it is presence. They built without mortar, said one elder, because they trusted the earth to hold the truths. Each stone was a word, and together they spoke of kings who built with harmony. Great Zimbabwe still speaks, not of lost grandeur, but of a civilization that never needed to shout to be remembered. In the dense heart of Central Africa, where rivers curve like ancient signatures and forests breathe with ancestral memory, there once stood a kingdom not merely ruled, but aligned. The kingdom of Kongo was not born from the sword, but from the circle. It rose as a sacred order, a civilization where the soul was the state and the land itself was a diagram of life. At the center of Kongo's sacred philosophy stood the Dikenga cosmogram, a symbol older than empire, deeper than doctrine. 4 points in a perfect circle. Birth in the east, maturity in the north, death in the west, rebirth in the south. This was no mere design. It was the architecture of being. The people of Congo did not just observe the world, they embodied it. Their cities, rituals, governance, and even funerals followed the rhythm of the cosmogram. In Congo, time moved in cycles, not lines. Power was inherited not only through blood, but through alignment. Kings rose not as conquerors, but as custodians of sacred timing. Every enthronement was a cosmic moment, the king entering not just a throne room, but a position within the living diagram of the world. The royal capital, Mbanza, Congo, sat on a mountaintop, a city raised above the earth to mimic the heavenly court. From there, kings administered justice with the blessing of both the living and the dead. They were advised not only by councils of nobles, but by lineages of spiritual wisdom keepers, priests, and custodians of the cosmogram. To rule was to balance, to govern was to listen, not just to people, but to time, spirit, and energy. Congo was a master of diplomacy and cultural fusion. Long before colonization, its rulers engaged with European envoys, traders, and missionaries, not as inferiors, but as equals. Treaties were signed, embassies were exchanged. Christian missionaries were welcomed into the court, but never allowed to dismantle the kingdom's spiritual framework. Instead, Congo absorbed, adapted, and reinterpreted, allowing Christianity to blend with ancestral veneration. Crosses became cosmograms. Saints mirrored spirits. Cathedrals were built, but so were sacred groves maintained. Congo demonstrated that spiritual resilience does not require rejection. It requires translation. The divine was not replaced. It was renamed. And when Congo began to fracture under the pressure of European incursion and internal strife, its memory remained unbroken. Even in the face of colonial violence, forced conversion, and the slave trade, the essence of the cosmogram endured. In hidden altars, in whispered prayers, in the syncretic blend of African Christianity and ancient codes, Congo survived. The land held the rhythm. The people kept the circle. They remembered the law of return. In Congo, the soul was a circle. It could bend, but never break. Architecture reflected these truths. Houses were built in circular compounds. Ceremonial paths followed solar logic. Burial rituals sent the soul west to the place of rest and awaited its return in the south. Reborn, renewed, remembered. Even resistance followed the cosmogram. Uprisings, re-emergence, reintegration. Congo did not fall. It transformed. Today, fragments of Congo's sacred science still pulse in Afro-diasporical religions across the Atlantic. In Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, and the American South. They carry the same rhythm, the same prayers, the same cosmograms drawn into the dirt with a finger. The crossroads remains. The circle turns. Congo was never a passive kingdom. It was a spiritual engine, a bridge between worlds, a kingdom where ritual was reality and balance was the highest law. Let us now walk to the final gate, the closing of this golden memory. They built with stone and bronze, with gold and mud, but their truest monument was the balance they kept with the world. Mali, Benin, Great Zimbabwe, Congo, these were not merely kingdoms. They were echoes of a sacred design. They remembered what the modern world forgets, that civilization is not measured by conquest, but by communion. Not by domination, but by divine rhythm. Africa's golden age was not a myth, nor a mystery. It was a moment, vast and brilliant, when knowledge ruled without violence and architecture breathed with the ancestors. Cities were not just constructed, they were composed. Streets followed stars. Shrines marked seasons. Palaces were aligned to prophecy. Every empire moved to the beat of the spirit. They spoke in geometry. They wrote in bronze. They dreamed in circles. This age did not rise alone. It rose through memory, through elders who carried maps in song, through builders who listened to the land, through kings who ruled with one ear turned toward the ancestors and the other toward the unborn. But this age did not last. Shadows approached. Trade turned into trespass. Diplomacy became domination. And soon, these thrones of harmony would be met with swords, ships, and silence. Yet something remained. Because what is built in sacred rhythm cannot be erased. It can only be buried. And memory is the shovel. Today, we are the ones holding that memory, recalling cities of light beneath forests, manuscripts sleeping beneath sand, bronzes speaking from behind glass in foreign museums. We remember. And in that remembrance, the sky shifts. Because memory is not just reflection, it is resurrection. They built with stone and bronze. But the truest monument was the balance they kept with the world. So, like to remember. Comment, the sky remembers, and subscribe to Africa Cosmos for episode 3, The Fall of the Kingdoms. Because this was not a lost world. It is the memory of the sky that once spoke in gold. And when we listen, it speaks again.